so sweet. So the last time I was here was June of 2009, and some wonderful person did this little needlepoint thing for me, and I loved it so much. I took it out of the frame, and I've just been in these 13, 14 years since, I've been thinking, what could I do with that? And I still haven't figured it out because it's just so doggone cute. But I just want you to know that this memento I have kept. I also want you to know that this is the last presentation. I have promised my family this is the last presentation that I'm on the books for. And we made this arrangement, it's hard to believe, 2 years ago. My exhibit traveled America for 16 years. And it closed at History, Colorado in 2021, which is where Sherry, she was there with a group of people, and that's when she approached me. And even though it was 2 years out, I don't make plans, for an hour out, but 2 years out. I just like y'all so much. I put it on there, and I said, no matter what, I'm going to make it, and I just am so appreciative of you having me back. My journey began in 2009. I'm sorry, my journey began in 1999. Math is not my thing. My journey began in 1999. I had been a homemaker for 26 years. My youngest child was going away for, college, and I realized this was the opportunity to have a second career. I'd always wanted to be a writer, and I thought, well, the first thing I'm going to write about is about the domestic symbol that stands for what I've just done with 26 years of my life. I'm going to write an article about an apron, but the thing was, I did not own an apron. For 26 years, I had worn cast-off clothes and wiped my hands on those clothes, obviously thinking more laundry was a good idea versus domestic armor. So in order to inspire me, I had to buy an apron. And the first apron that I came upon in a secondhand store, and they weren't all that readily available, was this apron. And I was immediately drawn to it because of the color. You can tell I like color. And her sewing skills, they're just good enough. And that's exactly what my sewing skills are, just good enough. So I bought this apron. It was 50 cents, except it was senior day, and I got it for 25 cents. And I was just like, oh my God, this is like the best. This turned out to be the best 25 cents I have ever spent in my life. This is the apron that started it all. I took it home, I washed it, I dried it, and while I was ironing it, it felt like this electricity leapt out of it into me. It was such a visceral experience. I thought I had been electrocuted by the iron. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm dead. They're never going to find me in the basement because nobody comes down here. I'll be rotting away down there. And then all of a sudden I thought, no, wait a minute, you're thinking, you're breathing, you're not dead. Something about this apron has sparked something within me. And I began to examine the stitching, and I began to imagine that this apron held the spirit of the woman who had sewed it and tied it on every day. That this apron was actually a connector to the women of earlier generations, because today's women, we can't have the opportunities that are available if we don't look over our shoulder and wave and blow a kiss to the generations before us that did not have our opportunities. So I began to think, I wonder if there are other people out there who think of the apron as this spiritual connector, that her voice is woven into the fabric, that the apron, you tie it on and you have within you. And I thought, I wonder if there are other people out there who feel this. So I did I did emails and postcards. I sent out 50, and it was kind of like, hey, have you ever thought of the apron as this connector? It's filled with spirituality. And I got, this is the kind of response I got. You need help. You have too much time on your hands. And then, why, yes, I have. So I thought, now wait a minute, 1 out of 50 was a yes, I have? And I thought, what is it that affected me so deeply that did not come across in this email and postcard campaign? And I thought, it's touching it. It was this connection of actually touching it. So I went and got an old laundry basket. It took me a while to find enough aprons to pile in there, drape the ties over and all of that. And then I took it with me everywhere I went for 4 years. And people go, no. But I am here to tell you, I did. I mean, I went to a Rockies game one time, and I was standing in the ladies' room line, you know, and there I was with my basket of aprons. This was before 9/11, so you could still walk on airplanes. You know, you could still smoke on the airplanes. You could have all that kind of fun, but you could walk around on an airplane without them saying, "Please take your seat." And so I would walk up and down the aisle with my apron basket, and people would just rise out of their seats. It was like a magnet. And everybody, whether I was on a street corner or standing in line for a mammography, I did that too. I had my basket of mammography. I actually sold copies of my book in the mammography line one time. It was so long. Anyway, that's an aside. And so, you know, when I do that to myself, then I go, oh, where was I? So what I realized was people reacted the very same way. They would say, oh my gosh, that apron reminds me of, or oh, my blank used to wear an apron just like that. So I thought, this is so curious. So I began to compile the stories I was hearing. And the first group of stories I encouraged them to be bucolic and prosaic and talk about that meemaw and talk about her biscuits and tell me that recipe and how the honey was from the hives, you know, way outside the garden wall. That made me feel good because it like validated what I just done with 26 years of my life. As I was staying home, happily being a homemaker, it was a time when women were leaving the home also to pursue personal interests and employment outside of the home. So I compiled these, you know, lovely little stories, and then I realized that when I zipped my lip and stopped the encouragement, they also began to tell me further storytelling, which was more about who we are as human beings. There was a lot of emotion involved. You didn't have to have walked in their footsteps to know exactly the emotion they were talking about. But who hasn't walked in the footsteps of a disappointment, of devotion, of happiness, of sadness? You know, those kinds of, you're a human being, you've walked in that path. So I had these very two different storytellings going on, and I didn't know what to do with them. And I started crying at night that I was collecting all these stories, but you know, the ones that made me feel good were one thing, and then the other stories were so fascinating, I couldn't stop collecting them. My husband got so sick and tired of listening to me crying about the whole thing that he said, maybe it's two different projects. And I went, oh my gosh. Yes, it was. One became the Apron book, which is a love story to the apron. And the other became Apron Chronicles, the exhibit, which traveled America for 16 years. So I was privy to two very different sides of what the apron can elicit from us. And through that, I became, the book got published, and then the exhibit began to travel, and I appeared. I was on CBS Sunday Morning Show. I was everywhere, and it was a glorious, glorious time. It just brought so much friendship and joy and aprons into my life. I just couldn't believe I was the luckiest person in the world. So the upside of this whole thing is aprons began to arrive in the mail through all this publicity. Eventually, 600 aprons found their way into my possession. That's a lot of aprons. So the first apron was wrapped in pink tissue paper inside an envelope. And this is the way all the aprons would come to me. It was like the person sending it wanted the apron to make a good impression on its first impression. So they were never smashed into an envelope or something. They always came tidied just like this. And this is the apron that was the first apron that came to me in the mail. And the woman who sent it to me said, this apron belonged to my neighbor, Miss Alaska Jewel Dyer, and she was the wife of our small town bank president. And every Christmas, she would have an open house, and the whole town was invited. And she would greet people wearing this adorable Christmas apron. She also held a private New Year's Eve party where she simply turned her apron around, and this is the apron that she wore for that occasion. I mean, the champagne glass is not good for anything except that Revlon red lipstick that you know Mrs. Dyer had. So it came into my care because the letter writer said, I'm leaving the town. I'm going where my children are, and I cannot take everything with me. And she had a son and daughter, and neither one is interested in this apron as a keepsake. And she said, I read about you, and I would like you to have this apron. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is an apron she's asking me to caretake, but she's also, I'm going to be the guardian of its memories. I am going to be in charge of sharing with everyone else what Mrs. Dyer could no longer do twice a year. So I began to learn about aprons and their history, because aprons, like I said, were starting to come to me in the mail, and I had to have some sense of what is so special about it aside from the apron memory itself. This apron, which comes from, let me turn it around, it is an absolute work of art. You can see from the tiny waist that this apron is from the turn of the century. This friend of mine, they were in one of the mining towns up in this area, and Linda said that she saw a bureau that she just had to have, and they had a large enough vehicle with them that her husband said, well, okay, and they packed it in the back and brought it home to Boulder. While she was going through the drawers, which were lined with old newspapers, you know, from the way back day, she pulled out some of the newspaper, and there was this apron, perfectly preserved. I mean, this is an elderly apron, and it is so beautiful. You can only imagine being in a mining town, being in a mining camp. She must have brought this with her on the wagon. It weighs like a feather. You've seen all the pictures where they had to leave possessions along the way, but not this. And the way she preserved it was sticking it under newspapers. And I like to think to be a treasure found by someone in the future. This is like a message in a bottle, only it was a message in a drawer of a woman who once led, I think, a very genteel life, and then ended up following her husband to the glory of, gold rush days and the mining camps. This apron has a very unique history. It comes from Newfoundland, and it is a long apron, if y'all can see how long it is, so you know that it was to cover a dress to her feet. Now, through my reading and all, what I learned was in the Wild West, where the homesteads were few and far between, good distances, he might set off to go fix some fences or go into town, and he'd be gone for 2 days. She would be in charge of the animals, the garden, the food, the children. She was in charge of everything, and she was. They were very vulnerable to attacks. So what women would do is sew a rifle pocket right on the inside of that apron. And because they could see from the dirt road and all, the hooves, breaking up the dust, the dirt, he could see if somebody was coming, and if somebody was, she just gathered the children, put them behind her, put her hand on that trigger, and just waited. I just love that image of her just going, please stop here, please. Because do I have something for you? In the 1920s, this is almost hard to believe. This is such a work of art. And it is, it still has its original ribbon, shoulder dealy-doos. So this dress, which it looks like a dress, but this is actually, it went over a dress. And because of its crisscross, you just have to imagine that it was, we all saw Downton Abbey, so in later times with the dropped waist, that's what this would have covered. And it is of a kind of cloth that is called lawn. It is absolutely just like holding air. And the embroidery is very simple, but you can see the femininity. She was definitely, doing this to wear over, I think, a particular dress. I've done that myself. Sewn an apron just to match something. Yes, I know. But it's what I would have in common with her. Now, this, women didn't have the vote. This was not the best of times. You could, somebody could walk out on you and go start another family, on the other side of town, and there was nothing you could do about it. Our rights were extremely limited. So you look at an apron like this, and it's so beautiful. It gives the illusion of accomplishment for women's sake, but actually, it's the exact opposite. She was a show thing. She was, she had value. She would dress up, and somebody would court her, and in a matter of, 6 weeks, she had moved out and was married, and she wasn't wearing this anymore. She'd gotten her man. But it's an interesting dichotomy that the aprons that are so beautiful like this are actually, expressing how limited some of our options really, really were. Which brings me to this apron, which is so beautiful. It's almost hard to imagine it. And look at the size of that waist. Ooh, 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 ooh. This is corset time, but not the basket corsets that we've all seen the photos of, you know, where it pushed your rib cage. I mean, just absolutely excruciating to get, for what was the time, the perfect silhouette of what a feminine, you know, what a woman would be. So this is turn of the century. This is the Victorian era. It has, she would have pinned this to her like that. I mean, it's just one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen. And the art that is here, it's called ribbon art. And what you imagine is Victorian times, you know, electricity was only for the wealthy. Everybody else was still losing their eyesight, you know, mending things by kerosene or candlelight. And girls had very, very few options. This was also a time of Calvinism, a religion at the time where, you know, you were born and God was angry at you from the get-go. You spent your whole life trying to change his mind, but good luck on that. You probably are just going to end up in the same hellhole that you came, you know, that you came from before. So there wasn't a lot of, you know, positivity, except for this. And girls would do this. Somebody had to teach them, but they would learn this art. And when I look at it, I think of dark times. You've seen how they dressed, dark clothing. They lived in mud huts and that kind of thing. And there was still hope. There was hope that light would come, that you would be forgiven maybe. God would find you somehow and forgive you. Or that you would have a better life, that there was hope. And this is one of the most beautiful aprons that I own, and I think it also holds the most emotion. One of the things that I also got into collecting, I would buy people's old sewing boxes. Some of them were really elaborate. You know, they had the old spools of thread inside, that kind of thing. But sometimes there would be a surprise like this. This is from the 1920s. It was a printed apron pattern. The embroidery came with it, so you just had to embroider it. But you can see what happened here. It got started, and this is what I think the story is. This woman received it as a gift. She hated doing this kind of thing, but there was no way. A friend gave it to her, and she thought, well, I'll give it a go. And then she just thought, what am I doing here? I hate this thing. And that's what she did. And then I found it, and I went, well, why did she never finish it? And I think that's why. She just hated it from the get-go. And I'm not finishing it, so if anybody here is interested, you just let me know. You just let me know. So when I was on CBS Sunday Morning Show, I got lots and lots of letters and aprons, of course, from something, you know, as big as that. And one of the things I received was a letter from a Mother Superior in Dubuque, Iowa. And she told me that she had been saving this tiny little apron from her mother. This little apron, and she hadn't known what to do with it until she saw me on TV, and she said, I want you to have it because you're going to know what to do with this thing. And in the pocket, in the little pocket, was a poem. And I even brought a pair of glasses. Yes, I did. Congratulate me now. I remembered where I put them. So this is the little poem. This neat little apron is sent to you. And this is what we wish you do. The little pocket you plainly see for a special purpose is meant to be. Now measure your waistline inch by inch and see that the measure does not pinch. For each small inch you measure around in the pocket, put a penny sound. The game is fair, you will admit. You waste your money, W-A-I-S-T, and we pocket it. August the 15th, remember the date. Send it in early so it won't be late. While the money your pockets so freely pay will be used by us in the wisest way. And it's by the women from the Circle A of St. Patrick's Parish in Garryowen. This was a fundraiser by immigrant women. The Mother Superior told me that her mother was of Polish descent and that their purpose with this little fundraiser was, this is how they raised money amongst themselves to keep the parish doors open and the priest in place. Now, when it was your turn to measure your waist and do not pinch, the pennies that went in that pocket, remember this was when bread was a penny a loaf. And that week when it was your turn to measure, that meant your family was going to have bread sliced a tad thinner than usual. The soup was going to be quite not as hearty because it was your turn to be part of the fundraiser. I was so taken with this, how women doing this amongst themselves. I mean, they didn't look outside. They didn't go around and knock on other people's door. This is what they figured to do just in their own little way as a fundraiser. And I thought, this is the most unique thing I'm ever going to see. And then I was I traveled with my exhibit, and I don't quite remember where, but and to this day, if I have a choice, I'm in a hotel, and I have a choice between a workout room or a bus that'll take me to an antique mall, I am on that bus every single time. I've never seen the workout room of a hotel room, ever. So I went to this antique mall, and I was just drawn to this booth in the very back, and it was dark, and there was like just boxes of dusty stuff in there, and do not know why I did it. But I got down on my hands and knees, and I'm rooting through stuff and all, and I found a little tiny apron, just like this. And in the pocket, I found a similar poem. And I thought, oh my goodness, women told other women about this little fundraiser, so they were doing the very same thing someplace else for the very same purpose. Well, maybe not to keep the church open, but for something that was important to them. And you look at the time period of this kind of thing, the market had crashed, the Depression, you had, the great drought, which went all the way to Texas, California. I mean, just absolutely horrific times for America. And women still figured it out, which leads me to say that if only we ruled the world, shit would get done. There you go. There you go. And speaking of antique malls, I was in another one, and I found a little Butterick transfer. And y'all are going to be totally invited afterwards to come and see these things up close. But it's cute. And the word for when they had dishes, that had little arms and legs and that kind of thing, it's anthropomorphizing. It's in that vein. That's kind of the word that I'm trying to say. It's when you give human characteristic to something that is absolutely not human, like dishes, this kind of thing. So this is just so cute. And when I took it up to the desk, you know, there wasn't a price on it. And the guy's looking at it and he's flopping it around. And I'm going, oh my God, don't do that, don't do that. But I didn't want him to know how much I wanted this. And then all of a sudden he goes, I don't know, I think I should just give it to you. And I thought, ah. But then I said, let me give you 50 cents. And he said, good enough. So I got 50 cents for it. I paid 50 cents for it. Then I got a hold of Butterick Simplicity, and in their archives, they don't even have this apron. They have a notation that tells them that it was made in, they gave this to me, it's just absolutely amazing. It's from 1945. They gave me all the, you know, documentation of it. It's from 1945. But like I said, they did not have a copy of their own, of this particular pattern. So, I was in Tulsa, and I was showing this to someone, and this woman said to me, you know what, I have a childhood apron from my mother when she was a child, and this is it, and it is the embroidery from 1945.
Cool. Wow.
Isn't that adorable? I mean, but in perfect condition. Just folded up in a drawer. And she said, would you like it? And I thought, yes, please. And that's what happened. That's how this came into my care. And the thing about all of y'all who have a childhood apron, they are the hardest aprons to find as collectibles because children wore them hard. You were maybe sewn one apron, and then when you outgrew it, the next apron was mother's half apron, you know, that just got rolled up and, you know, tied around your armpits, and you stood on a little stool. So most children had one memento apron, and they usually did not make it to this point. So jumping ahead on that point, I have I finally got grandchildren. Everybody here knows what that is. They didn't do it on your schedule, they did it on their schedule. And so in our mid-70s, my husband and I suddenly have a newly 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. We just spent 4 days with them, and I have to tell you, surviving interrupted sleep at 75 and potty training, I gotta tell you, I don't know how we did it. And it took both of us to manage 2 tiny little people for 4 days. Unbelievable. So I decided that she needed her own little apron, and I was on a very long plane ride, and I had brought all the stuff with me, and I decided I was going to sew this apron by hand. And every once in a while, because it's so cute, I would hold it up to admire it, you know, like this. And I would just hear people on the airplane just going crazy. And finally, it just went, you know, all the way around the airplane. Now, this fit her for about an hour. It was about a good hour, though. I mean, it was a good hour. But rather than leave it to her mother to safekeep something like this, you know, when we babysit, I just go through everything and take all the stuff that I've made and, you know, take it away and put it in my own memento box, because I'm the one that it really means something to, and I just hope I last long enough that I can bring it back out to show that girl who's 4 now, you know, 14 maybe. So there's that. This has a great story. A woman told me this fabric, they have reproduced this particular fabric. The cowboys, this fabric's been, like I said, reproduced. But this woman told me that in the 50s, her father worked for AAA. And AAA he had a territory, and his territory were like 5 western states. And he would drive around. They'd have to stop again at the Howard Johnsons to make sure the bathrooms were still clean, you know, all of that. That's how updating was done for people who were traveling on the road. It had to be done in person. And she told me that while her father drove, he had created a fold-down thing in the passenger seat that held a little Tom Thumb typewriter. Do you remember? I mean, they're like that big. And that's where her mother would sit, and he would dictate to her, and she would type, you know, on that little thing, and, you know, roll the paper and type through. And then when they got, you know, to the end and they returned to Denver, then he would just turn in all the type, you know, update until the next time that he had to go out. So her mother, she said, bought this fabric on one of their trips, and she sewed this little apron for herself, and she sewed this for him.
Oh my God.
And I don't even want to think what I'd have to do to get my husband to wear this. I don't even want to think about it. So, but this is what they would wear together. You know, the 50s was all about entertaining at home. And this is how they would greet everybody at home. But I think, you know, today if you said, you know, yeah, I've got to go on the road and see if that Conoco station still has, you know, diet-free Coke or something like that. I mean, people would just look at you, young people. I showed my 4-year-old grandchild a telephone, an old telephone, and I might as well have been showing her a dinosaur. Well, she knows what dinosaurs look like. But an ironing board. I might as well have shown her an ironing board because I don't know anybody that has an ironing board but me. So, same thing. So, when I was telling y'all that not all the stories were, you know, when I think of Mimo, I think of the biscuits and all. I had a neighbor in Pueblo, and I went to visit her one day, and her mother was there, and I was telling, Colleen was asking me about my apron journey, how it was going and all, and her mother suddenly spoke up, and she said, you know, I had an apron one time, and I haven't been able to find it in like 30-some years, and it was an important apron to me. It belonged to my husband's youngest brother, and he died under tragic circumstances, very, very young, and he had sewn this apron with his mother, and I'm always sad that I don't know what happened to it. And Colleen said, Mother, are you talking about this apron, which I've had hanging on a hook in my kitchen for 30-some years? And her mother said, oh my gosh, that's his. That's Jack's apron. So Jack was the youngest of 5 boys in a ranching family. He was also not interested in the roughness of what his brothers' lives were, doing the hard work on a ranch, being around the big animals and all of that. He was much more interested being with his mother. He was a boy that today would be more accepted than at that time. He was definitely not just a mother's boy, but a boy who was effeminate. I'll just put it out there and say effeminate. And that was a hard thing to be in the back old days. I mean, most of the times you hit it, but not with his mother. She taught him to sew. This apron is made by hand. He embroidered it. It's quite a feat. So, there's a newspaper article that appeared in the November 25th, 1932 newspaper of this, and it was Russell Vogt killed while rabbit hunting. I mean, we don't report things today with a description of what happened. He was not allowed to have a firearm. His father said, you got to earn the right to have a firearm. You do not know, you haven't been doing things on the ranch and all to earn the right, so no, you may not. Well, he was a boy who wanted to try a firearm. He went out with a friend, he borrowed a rifle, they were rabbit hunting, and he had it with the bullet hole part, that part, facing him when he was hitting some brush. They describe it in great detail. The gun went off, the rifle went off, and it basically blew his head off. When the child who was with him saw what happened, he ran to the farmhouse, and as it reports, when the child reported what had happened in the field, the mother had a stroke on the spot and did not recover. So the Apron just has the saddest history, except the joy that this woman felt when her daughter showed her this apron. She said, he was a funny child. My husband says he was the funniest one of them all, and he loved practical jokes. And all of a sudden, the tragedy of 1932 was turned around to remembering him with the good times. No longer was it an apron of absolute heart-wrenching sadness, but an apron of celebration of a boy who, while he was alive, was loved. This apron, which is from the 1950s, I think is just like one of the most clever things you could ever see. It's plastic. I mean, just like spray some water on there and you were done. But it's how gay it is. It is so vibrant. I mean, you just look at it and just happy. I'm happy looking at it. And if you look at the pictures, post-war, people's kitchens, suddenly there were conveniences, the munition plants went back, everybody could have a refrigerator, everybody could have a sewing machine. I mean, everything after the war. By 1950, housewives were dressing up to stay home. I mean, June Cleaver figured it out early. Put on those heels, put on those pearls, and you were set for the day. This tiny apron belonged to my friend Erin Owens, who lives in Lubbock. Her family is from New Orleans, and she said her mother grew up in a generational household, and her great-grandmother and her mother and the grandmother were in charge of the household, making sure everything was tidy and stuff like that. And when the father, the patriarch, would get off the trolley and walk down, they would be sitting on a veranda on the front of the house, and everybody, in New Orleans, hot and muggy and all that kind of stuff, would be having a good old Coca-Cola, because at the time, Coca-Cola had an additive that made you quite perky for that late afternoon, when you were just about to give up. Everybody would have a Coke. So they made these tiny little aprons to put over the Coke bottle because of the condensation. And that's what it would soak up the condensation and not get on your clothes. When you look at this thing and you look at the size of this rickrack, you are not going to believe how tiny it is. And it's sewn on there with a sewing machine. I can't even imagine how she managed to do it. And it has a tiny little pocket for these straws. Now, to find straws in today's world that fit that tiny pocket, there is somebody on eBay who's still doing the happy dance that I found her and this little tiny box of straws. But the true story of this is that when Katrina came through New Orleans, everything was lost. Aaron's family just lost everything. But there was a mausoleum of her family, and inside the mausoleum there was a silver soup tureen, and inside the tureen were these little aprons, and the water came up to the top of the steps of the mausoleum and did not go any further. So all that was lost in the homes, the aprons actually survived. Wow. And she lent them to me. I had them framed, and it traveled with the exhibit for, like I said, the 16 years, because it's such an unusual testament to a family history. They lost everything except for the tiny little aprons which were in the soup tureen, which her mother had received as a wedding gift, and she had put it in the mausoleum. I have, I think, one more thing. I wanted to show you. Hold on. It's down here at the bottom. Everybody who has old dish towels, you can turn it into an apron, just like that. This is a great gift to give as a kit to young people who do not have an apron, because they can. I did it with embroidery thread, and a big needle, with a big old eye on it, so you can just thread it. 2 vintage buttons, that's my choice. This is just twill, you just buy it, at the store, but this makes a really cute apron, and if you make your ties long enough, then you can put a towel over it, because your apron, if you did not know, your apron is not a dish towel. It is actually, you need a dish towel and your apron. And I'm going to be wrapping it up with this one. There are no men in the room right now, which is always, I'm real sorry there's not a man in this room. But I collected aprons. I stopped collecting them into the 1960s because then aprons got attitude. They started telling you things like kiss the cook, or for this I went to college. They started telling you stuff, and I didn't want to hear an apron having an opinion. So I stopped collecting aprons at that point. But this apron is from the 1960s. And the idea of it is, and this is what makes it so great when there's a man around, because